The vastness of space had always been silent, indifferent, and cold. At least, that's what humanity had thought for centuries. When the first contact came, it wasn't through peaceful emissaries or a message of friendship. It came in the form of a warning. The Galactic Accord, a coalition of dozens of species, transmitted a single ultimatum to Earth: submit or be annihilated. Humanity's entry into the galactic stage had been sudden, almost accidental. In their drive to explore, humans had inadvertently trespassed on what the Accord deemed their sovereign territory. For the Accord, it was routine. Species that defied them rarely lasted long. Earth would either kneel or become a cautionary tale for others. What they didn't count on was humanity's defiance. The decision to fight was made in a single, electrifying moment broadcast to the world. President Asha Moreno, standing in the heart of a battered United Nations assembly, looked directly into the camera and declared, "We will not bow. Let the stars remember this day. Let them remember what it means to face humanity." The transmission was sent back to the Accord, a bold refusal that left the Galactic Council stunned. Earth, barely capable of interstellar travel, was refusing the most powerful force in the galaxy. For the Accord, the answer was simple: annihilation. But humanity? Humanity had other plans. Orbiting above Earth, the Accord fleet began its approach. Sleek ships, bristling with weapons that could turn continents to ash, hung in low orbit. The skies burned as their first warning shots scorched the upper atmosphere. Commander Elias Kane watched the chaos from the bridge of Earth's first battlecruiser, Resolute Dawn. It was a patchwork of human ingenuity, a mix of salvaged alien technology and good old-fashioned stubbornness. It wasn't pretty, but it was humanity's best hope. "We can't outgun them," muttered Lieutenant Calloway, his eyes glued to the tactical display. The enemy ships outnumbered them 50 to 1. Each Accord vessel dwarfed the Resolute Dawn in firepower and technology. Commander Kane smiled grimly. "We're not here to outgun them. We're here to outthink them." With a wave of his hand, Kane brought up a holographic map of Earth's orbital defenses. The planet had become a fortress in the months since the Accord's ultimatum. Thousands of satellites, equipped with experimental railguns and laser arrays, formed a makeshift web around the planet. On the ground, missile silos lay hidden beneath cities, deserts, and oceans. It wasn't enough. Kane knew that. But humanity had never relied on fairness to win a fight. "Begin Operation Chimera," Kane ordered. On the Accord flagship, the Celestial Vanguard, Admiral Threxus of the Urana Brood observed Earth's resistance with detached amusement. The humans were an arrogant species, their defiance laughable. His claws tapped rhythmically against the console as he watched their ships scramble into a defensive formation. "They lack discipline," Threxus remarked, his voice a low, guttural growl. "Primitive creatures relying on desperation." "Admiral," an officer interrupted, "our long-range sensors are detecting irregularities in their orbital network." Threxus waved dismissively. "It's irrelevant. Begin planetary bombardment." The moment the first Accord ship fired, Earth's response was instantaneous. Railgun satellites opened fire, unleashing slugs at near-light speed. They weren't designed for precision but for volume, and the Accord fleet found itself bombarded by a hailstorm of projectiles. The fleet's shields absorbed most of the damage, but one unlucky frigate's shield failed. A railgun slug punched through its hull, causing it to implode in a spectacular explosion. Threxus snarled, "Increase power to the shields. Their resistance changes nothing." But the humans weren't done. As the fleet advanced, a second wave of attack struck. Missiles launched from hidden silos streaked into the sky, targeting the Accord's larger vessels. Many were intercepted by point defense systems, but a few slipped through, detonating with enough force to send shockwaves through the enemy formation. Threxus leaned forward, his amusement turning to irritation. "These primitives are more resourceful than anticipated." Back on the Resolute Dawn, Commander Kane watched the chaos with satisfaction. The first phase of Operation Chimera had bought them time, but it wasn't enough to win. "Activate the harpoons," Kane ordered. Lieutenant Calloway hesitated. "Sir, they're untested." "Do it," Kane snapped. The Resolute Dawn fired its experimental weapon, a massive tethered harpoon made of carbon steel alloy. It shot out like a spear, piercing the shield of a nearby Accord cruiser before embedding itself in the hull. The Accord ship tried to shake free, but the harpoon held fast. Electricity surged through the tether, frying the cruiser's systems. The ship drifted helplessly as its crew scrambled to regain control. It was a desperate move, but desperation was humanity's greatest weapon. The galaxy had never seen a species fight like humans. Every battle a gamble, every move unpredictable. The Accord fleet, accustomed to swift victories, found itself bogged down in an unrelenting fight. Human tactics were unconventional and ruthless. Satellites collided with enemy ships in kamikaze runs. Civilian ships lured Accord vessels into ambushes. On the ground, resistance fighters used guerrilla tactics to strike at invaders. Across the galaxy, news of Earth's defiance spread like wildfire. Species long subjugated by the Accord watched with growing awe. If humanity could stand against the mighty Galactic Accord, perhaps they could too. For Admiral Threxus, the realization came too late. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival, they were sending a message. The battle for Earth was far from over. Humanity's resilience was tested with every passing hour, but so too was the galaxy's belief in the Accord's invincibility. As Commander Kane stared out at the burning skies, he whispered to himself, "Let them remember this day," and the galaxy did. The Resolute Dawn shook violently as another barrage of energy blasts tore through the void. Sparks erupted from overloaded consoles, and the bridge filled with the acrid smell of burning circuits. Commander Kane gripped the edge of his station, his knuckles white, but his voice remained calm. "Status report," he barked. Lieutenant Calloway wiped blood from a cut on his forehead and scanned the flickering tactical display. "Shields are holding at 20%, sir. Engine efficiency is dropping. Those last hits pushed us hard. Keep them guessing. Roll the ship and fire the starboard railguns. I want those harpoons ready for another shot." The Resolute Dawn banked sharply, its thrusters straining against the punishment it was enduring. From the starboard side, 3 railguns unleashed a volley of kinetic slugs, aimed not at a single ship but at the dense formation of the Accord fleet. One slug clipped a smaller frigate, its shield shimmering before the ship's hull ruptured, spilling debris into space. "Commander," Calloway continued, "we're picking up distress signals from the orbital defense stations. They're being overwhelmed." Kane's jaw tightened. "We can't lose them. Patch me through to ground command." A crackling voice filled the bridge. "Ground command here. This is Colonel Briggs." "Colonel," Kane said, "those defense stations are critical. Can you reroute power to their shields remotely?" "Negative, Commander," Briggs replied. "We're stretched too thin. The Accord's landing troops faster than we can repel them. They're hitting New Dakar, Mumbai, and the North American Federation simultaneously." Kane leaned back, calculating. Earth's forces were fighting on every front, from the skies above to the cities below. The enemy was overwhelming, but the Accord still underestimated one thing: human adaptability. "Colonel, hold the ground. I don't care if you have to throw rocks at them. Just keep them busy. I'll make sure those stations keep firing." "Copy that," Briggs said. "We'll make them regret stepping foot here." The channel closed, and Kane turned to his crew. "This is it, people. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and bleeding out, but we're not done yet. Load the last of the EMP charges into the harpoons. If they want to take Earth, they'll have to pay for it in blood." The bridge crew responded with a collective nod. Despite the odds, despite the chaos, no one showed fear. Humanity had been knocked down too many times to be afraid of another fight. The Resolute Dawn turned toward the heart of the Accord fleet, its battered hull glinting in the light of distant explosions. 2 more harpoons fired, their tethers crackling with energy as they embedded themselves in a pair of cruisers. The EMP charges detonated seconds later, sending waves of electromagnetic disruption through the enemy ships. Their lights flickered, engines sputtered, and weapons fell silent. A cheer erupted on the bridge, but Kane wasn't celebrating. He knew the Accord wouldn't let this humiliation stand. They doubled down. They always did. And they did. The flagship Celestial Vanguard unleashed a concentrated beam of energy, slicing through one of Earth's orbital defense stations. The station exploded in a brilliant cascade of fire and debris, the shockwave rippling across the fleet. "That was Station Delta," Calloway said grimly. 200 lives gone. Kane closed his eyes for a moment. He couldn't let himself feel the weight of every loss. "Not now. We'll make it count," he said softly. "What's the status of the experimental drones?" "Unresponsive," another officer replied. "The jamming field they've set up is scrambling our command frequencies." Kane frowned. "Then we'll have to take out the jammer." "Where is it?" Calloway scanned the data. "It's on the surface, near the Andes. Heavily fortified." "Of course it is," Kane muttered. He tapped the intercom. "Engineering, prep a drop shuttle. I'll lead the strike team myself." The bridge fell silent. "Sir," Calloway said cautiously, "with all due respect, you're the fleet's commander. You can't risk." "Risk?" Kane interrupted, his voice sharp. "The whole planet's at risk, Lieutenant. Every second we wait, more lives are lost. I trust you to keep this ship fighting. Let me do what I need to do." Calloway nodded reluctantly. "Aye, sir." Kane left the bridge, his footsteps echoing in the corridors of the battered ship. As he suited up in the armory, he could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. But it wasn't just his burden. It was humanity's. Every soldier, every scientist, every civilian was fighting in their own way. Together, they were something the galaxy had never seen before. A force that refused to break. The drop shuttle launched from the resolute dawn, weaving through the chaos of battle. Kane and his squad, a mix of Earth's finest soldiers and engineers, braced themselves as they descended into the war-torn atmosphere. Below, the Andes burned. Accord troops moved in tight, disciplined formations, their advanced walkers and drones carving paths of destruction. But for every step they took, humanity pushed back harder. Improvised weapons, ambushes, even booby-trapped vehicles turned the mountain range into a death trap. Kane's shuttle landed amidst the chaos, the ramp lowering to reveal a scene straight out of hell. Fires raged, smoke choked the air, and the sound of gunfire was deafening. "Move out," Kane shouted, leading his squad toward the Accord jammer. This fight was far from over. And if the galaxy thought humanity was dangerous now, they hadn't seen anything yet. The moment Kane's boots hit the scorched earth, the acrid smell of burning vegetation and charred metal filled his lungs. The Andes, once majestic and serene, now roared with the chaos of battle. Humanity's defenders, clad in mismatched armor and wielding scavenged weapons, darted through the rocky terrain like shadows, taking potshots at the advancing Accord troops. Kane's squad fanned out, their movements precise despite the uneven terrain. Sergeant Valdez, his second in command, crouched beside him, her plasma rifle humming softly in the dim light. "Jammer's about 3 clicks northeast," she said, pointing toward a jagged ridge partially obscured by smoke and debris. Satellite scans showed heavy resistance, walker units, drones, and infantry. "It's a fortress." Kane adjusted the grip on his rifle and nodded. "Good. Let's give them a reason to regret picking this fight. Valdez, you take Bravo team and circle around. Draw their fire if you can. Charlie and I will hit them head-on and plant the charges." Valdez smirked. "Classic Kane. You take the hard road, and we get to have all the fun." Kane grinned. "You've got 10 minutes to make a mess. Don't let me down." Valdez gave him a quick salute before signaling her team to follow. They melted into the shadows, moving with the practiced ease of soldiers who'd spent months fighting an enemy that outgunned them at every turn. Kane motioned for Charlie team to advance. The 5 soldiers followed him up the ridge, keeping low as the sound of explosions echoed through the mountains. In the distance, the Accord's walker units loomed like metallic giants, their massive legs crushing everything in their path. Drones buzzed overhead, their searchlights sweeping the terrain. The team reached a rocky outcropping overlooking the Accord's forward base. The jammer was unmistakable, a towering structure of sleek, alien design, its surface pulsing with blue energy. Surrounding it were rows of troops, automated turrets, and 3 of the towering walkers. Corporal Danner whistled softly. "That's a lot of hardware." "You sure about this, sir?" Kane smirked, his confidence unwavering. "Danner, if I wasn't sure." Would I have dragged you all the way out here? Point taken, Danner muttered, checking his weapon. Kane activated his comms. Valdez, status? Almost in position, Valdez replied. We've got eyes on a supply convoy. Thinking about making some fireworks. Do it. On my mark. The seconds ticked by, each one stretching into eternity as Kane studied the enemy positions. His pulse was steady, his breathing controlled. He'd fought in countless skirmishes, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival. This was about sending a message to the Accord that humanity wasn't a species to be trifled with. Mark, he said. Valdez's team struck with brutal efficiency. Explosions erupted from the convoy as their ambush began. Accord troops scrambled to respond, their once perfect formation descending into chaos. Kane could hear Valdez's laughter over the comms as her team fired from the shadows, picking off enemies and disappearing before they could return fire. Charlie team, move, Kane ordered. They descended the ridge in a controlled sprint, using the chaos to their advantage. The Accord's attention was split, their disciplined ranks faltering under the sudden assault. Kane's squad weaved through the battlefield, using the terrain for cover as they closed the distance to the jammer. The first obstacle was one of the walkers. Its towering frame cast a shadow over the battlefield, its cannons swiveling toward Valdez's team. Kane motioned for Danner, who pulled a rocket launcher from his pack and took aim. Clear, Danner shouted. The rocket streaked through the air, slamming into the walker's jointed leg. The explosion sent it toppling like a felled tree, crushing several Accord soldiers beneath it. Cheers erupted from nearby human fighters who had been holding the line. Keep moving, Kane yelled. The team pressed forward, their rifles cutting down any Accord troops who tried to stop them. By the time they reached the jammer's perimeter, Valdez's team had drawn most of the enemy forces away, leaving the turrets and a handful of soldiers as their main obstacles. Charges ready? Kane asked. Locked and loaded, Danner replied, patting the satchel of explosives strapped to his back. Good. I'll cover you. Plant them on the base of the structure and set a 10-second timer. We don't get paid for sticking around. Danner nodded, and the team moved into position. Kane fired at the turrets, drawing their attention while Danner sprinted toward the jammer. The Accord troops guarding it turned to fire, but they were too slow. Kane's squad took them down with precision shots, clearing the way. Danner reached the base of the jammer and began placing the charges. His fingers worked quickly, his training overriding the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Charges set, he called out. Fall back, Kane ordered. The team retreated, moving as one toward the cover of the rocky ridge. Danner triggered the timer, and 10 seconds later, the night lit up with a blinding explosion. The shockwave knocked them off their feet, but when Kane looked back, he saw the jammer reduced to a smoking heap of twisted metal. The effect was immediate. The Accord's drones, once a coordinated swarm of death, began to falter. Their movements became erratic, their systems disrupted without the jammer's signal. Human fighters cheered as the tide of battle shifted. Kane activated his comms. Valdez, the jammer's down. How's it looking on your end? Beautiful, Valdez replied. Their drones are dropping like flies, and the walkers are struggling to coordinate. I think we've got them on the ropes. Kane allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Good. Let's press the advantage. Regroup at. Before he could finish, a deafening roar shook the battlefield. Kane turned just in time to see a massive ship descending from the clouds. It was unlike any Accord vessel he'd seen before, its sleek design bristling with weapons. The ground trembled as it landed, and a hatch opened to reveal a figure standing tall against the backdrop of fire and smoke. The figure stepped forward, its armor gleaming with an otherworldly sheen. Kane's stomach sank as he realized this wasn't just another Accord soldier. This was something else. Something worse. Kane, Valdez's voice came through the comms, filled with unease. What the hell is that? Kane didn't have an answer, but as the figure raised its weapon, he knew one thing. The fight was far from over. The figure stepped down the ramp with deliberate precision, each movement radiating authority and menace. Its armor shimmered with a strange, liquid-like glow, constantly shifting between hues of black, silver, and deep crimson. Energy crackled faintly around its gauntlet hands, and its face, if it could be called that, was obscured by a smooth, featureless helmet that seemed to pulse in time with the distant hum of the descending ship. Kane instinctively gripped his rifle tighter. He'd fought countless Accord troops, but this wasn't like anything he'd seen before. The presence of this being was almost palpable, like standing too close to an exposed reactor core. Around him, his squad exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence wavering. "Commander," Valdez's voice cut through the comms again, this time sharper. "We're reading massive energy signatures coming off that thing. Whatever it is, it's not standard Accord infantry." "No kidding," Kane muttered under his breath. He activated his squad-wide comm. "Eyes up, everyone. We've got a new player on the field. Stay sharp." The figure finally came to a stop at the base of the ramp, surveying the battlefield as if it were deciding whether it was worth its time. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it raised one hand. A ripple of energy surged outward, an invisible force that hit like a tidal wave. Kane and his squad were thrown off their feet, slammed into the jagged rocks behind them. "Everyone okay?" Kane groaned, pulling himself up. His armor had absorbed most of the impact, but the blow still left him dazed. "I'm good," Valdez said, though she sounded shaken. "But what the hell was that?" Kane didn't have time to answer. The figure had already begun to move, striding across the battlefield with an almost predatory grace. Accord troops rallied to its side, emboldened by its presence, and began pushing forward with renewed vigor. Kane's squad scrambled to regroup, taking cover behind a cluster of boulders. Danner peeked out, his hands trembling slightly as he aimed his rocket launcher. "I've got a clear shot. Should I take it?" "Wait," Kane said, holding up a hand. Something about the figure's movements told him it wasn't going to go down so easily. Too late. Danner fired. The rocket streaked toward the figure, trailing a plume of smoke. For a brief moment, Kane dared to hope. But then, with a casual flick of its hand, the figure deflected the rocket midair. The projectile spiraled off course and exploded harmlessly in the distance. "Okay," Kane muttered. "That's new." The figure turned its featureless helmet toward their position, and Kane felt a chill run down his spine. It began to approach, its steps unhurried but deliberate. "We've got to move," Kane said. "Now." The squad broke cover, sprinting toward the ridge. Energy blasts rained down around them as the Accord troops advanced, but the real threat was the figure. It raised its hands again, and this time, the air itself seemed to ripple and distort. Rocks shattered, and the ground cracked as an unseen force tore through the battlefield. Kane and his squad barely made it to the top of the ridge, diving behind a natural rock formation just as the figure's attack carved a trench through the spot they'd occupied seconds earlier. "This is insane," Danner panted. "How are we supposed to fight that?" "We adapt," Kane said, his mind racing. He glanced toward the burning wreckage of the jammer. The Accord's lines were still in disarray, their drones erratic, their walkers struggling to function without coordination. There was a chance, slim, but still a chance, that humanity could hold the line if they acted fast. But this new arrival complicated everything. "Valdez," Kane said, switching to her channel. "We need intel on that thing. Can you patch into what's left of the orbital network? See if they've picked up anything." "Already on it," Valdez replied. "Give me 30 seconds. Make it 15. The figure was still advancing, its attention fixed on Kane's position. It stopped at the base of the ridge and extended one hand. A low, vibrating hum filled the air as the rocks around them began to shift and crumble. Kane's eyes widened as he realized what was about to happen. "Run!" he shouted. The squad scattered just as the entire ridge collapsed in a thunderous explosion of dust and debris. Kane tumbled down the slope, his armor scraping against jagged rocks. He hit the ground hard, but adrenaline forced him to his feet. His squad was scattered, but most of them were moving, their silhouettes visible through the thick dust. "Commander," Valdez's voice crackled through the calm. "We've got something. That thing, it's not Accord. At least, not entirely." "What do you mean?" Kane asked, dodging a stray energy blast. "It's a hybrid," Valdez said. "Accord tech mixed with something else. We're not sure what, but it's way more advanced than anything we've seen before. Whatever it is, it's dangerous. Kane didn't need a briefing to tell him that. The figure was already closing in again, its movements eerily calm despite the chaos around it. We can't take this thing head-on, Kane said. We need a new plan. Valdez hesitated. We could lure it toward one of the active defense grids. If we can get it in range, we might be able to hit it with a concentrated strike. Worth a shot, Kane said. Mark the nearest grid and send the coordinates to my HUD. A waypoint appeared on his visor, blinking faintly through the dust and smoke. It wasn't far, but reaching it would mean cutting through the thickest part of the battlefield. Everyone regroup on me, Kane ordered. We're going for a walk. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if sensing Kane's intentions. It raised one hand, and a pulse of energy erupted from its palm, scattering Accord and human fighters alike. Kane gritted his teeth. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a hunt, and the figure wasn't going to stop until its prey was caught. Kane and his squad sprinted toward the marked coordinates, the battlefield an inferno of chaos around them. Energy blasts, gunfire, and explosions created a cacophony that seemed to drown out even their thoughts. The defense grid was less than a kilometer away, a towering structure bristling with automated cannons and high-yield plasma turrets. It had been designed to repel entire fleets, but now it would need to focus on a single, terrifying foe. The figure moved through the battlefield like a predator, its advance unrelenting. Accord troops parted for it, their fear of being caught in its path evident. It didn't waste time with them. Its gaze never left Kane and his team. Valdez, what's the grid status? Kane panted as he ducked behind a ruined transport vehicle. Online, but barely, Valdez responded. The power relays are shot. You'll have one shot, maybe two, before it overloads. That's all we'll need, Kane said. He turned to his squad, their faces streaked with dirt and blood, but still defiant. Listen up. We're leading it straight to the defense grid. Once we're in range, I'll draw its attention while you activate the override. Sir, that thing will tear you apart, Danner said, his voice shaky. Probably, Kane replied with a wry smile. But it's better than letting it rip Earth apart. Stick to the plan. No heroics. The squad hesitated, but they nodded. Kane's confidence, even in the face of near-certain death, was infectious. They knew he wouldn't ask them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. As they pushed forward, the figure closed the distance with alarming speed. Kane turned and fired his rifle, aiming for its center mass. The round sparked harmlessly off its shimmering armor, but it slowed, seemingly more intrigued than threatened. Over here, Kane shouted, waving his arms. You want me? Come and get me. The figure tilted its head, then raised one hand. A concussive wave of energy shot out, blasting the ground around Kane and sending him sprawling. It advanced, its steps measured, as if savoring the moment. Kane scrambled to his feet, his ears ringing. He glanced over his shoulder and saw the defense grid looming ahead. They were close, so close. Keep moving, he yelled to his squad. Don't stop. They reached the base of the grid just as the figure stepped into range. Its featureless helmet turned upward, its attention shifting momentarily to the massive turrets above. Kane could almost feel its realization. A trap. Now, Kane shouted. Valdez and Danner sprinted to the override terminal. Sparks flew as they pried open the panel, exposing the wiring within. Valdez's fingers flew across the controls, bypassing security protocols and rerouting power. Just a few more seconds, she yelled. The figure raised both hands, energy crackling between its palms. Kane fired again, this time aiming for its head. The shots were useless, but they succeeded in drawing its attention back to him. That's right, Kane muttered. Focus on me, you bastard. The figure unleashed a surge of energy, a crackling beam that carved a trench through the earth. Kane dove to the side, the heat of the blast singing his armor. He rolled onto his back and fired again, knowing it was futile but refusing to back down. Grids online, Valdez shouted. The defense grid roared to life. Massive plasma turrets swiveled toward the figure, their barrels glowing with accumulated energy. The air itself seemed to hum with power as the turrets unleashed their payload. Beams of concentrated plasma lanced through the battlefield, slamming into the figure with unrelenting force. The figure staggered, its shimmering armor flickering as it struggled to absorb the onslaught. It raised its hands, creating a translucent shield that held back the worst of the barrage, but the sheer power of the grid was too much. Cracks appeared in its armor, and for the first time, it faltered. "Hit it again," Kane yelled. The turrets fired a second volley, this time overwhelming the figure's defenses. Its shield shattered, and the plasma beams struck it directly. The figure let out a distorted, inhuman roar as its armor disintegrated, revealing a strange, pulsing mass of energy beneath. For a brief moment, it looked almost vulnerable. "Danner, take the shot," Kane ordered. Danner didn't hesitate. He hefted his rocket launcher, aimed at the exposed core, and fired. The rocket streaked through the air and struck the figure dead center. The explosion was deafening, a brilliant flash of light that blinded everyone on the battlefield. When the dust settled, the figure was gone. Only a smoking crater remained where it had stood. Cheers erupted from nearby human fighters as the Accord forces began to retreat. Without their mysterious champion, their morale crumbled, and they fled the battlefield in disarray. Kane slumped to the ground, exhaustion finally catching up to him. His squad gathered around, their faces a mixture of relief and disbelief. "We did it," Valdez said, her voice almost a whisper. "We actually did it." Kane managed a tired grin. "Told you we'd give them a reason to think twice." The victory, however, was bittersweet. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of fallen comrades, and the cost of survival was written in every scarred inch of Earth's surface. But they had won, and for now, that was enough. As the resolute dawn descended to retrieve them, Kane looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Accord would be regrouping, plotting their next move. But humanity had shown them something they would never forget. They were no longer prey. They were survivors, fighters, and innovators. And they had defied the stars. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy would think twice before underestimating humanity.